Right, well, brothers and sisters and friends, thank you so much for coming out this evening. It's going to be hopefully a fascinating evening, because what we're going to do is we're going to look back at 2016 at our vantage point here on the 4th of January 2017. And I think it's good for us to look back, because as Winston Churchill famously said, the further back you look, the further forward you can see. And actually I think he's right. And you know, the wonderful thing is that when we look back over a span of just a short period of time, like a year, we can definitely see God's hand working in the world and bringing about his plan and purpose as revealed to us in his word of truth, the Bible. And all this is pointing to the fact that the Lord Jesus Christ is imminently going to return from heaven, physically back to this earth, to establish the kingdom of God, that long-awaited kingdom of God. Jesus has waited in amazing patience, hasn't he, himself, for nearly 2,000 years to return. And one day soon, his Father, the Lord God, will turn to him and say, "Son, today I want you to return to the earth and establish my kingdom." And God, in his absolute mercy, has recorded for us in the Bible so many, many events that are to occur just before Jesus is to return. And I was thinking about this the other day. You know, God didn't have to give us any prophecy at all, did he? He could have written the Bible and just said, one day Jesus will come back, and left it at that. And left us just to wait with nothing to look at. But God, as I say, in his mercy, knows that we need to see what's happening in the world. And when you think about it, so much of the Bible is full of prophecy, is full of history written in advance, because surely that is what prophecy is, isn't it? And all of this helps us stay awake, it helps us stay alert, and for me, and I'm sure it does for you, it helps to keep our lives in perspective, because too easily, the world is full of distractions and work and money and worries. But if we are constantly on our toes, believing that imminently Jesus is coming back, suddenly things that might have seemed a very major issue in our lives pale right down into insignificance, because when Jesus returns, all is going to get sorted out. So if I was to ask you in 2016, in fact I am going to ask you, in 2016, what would you say were some of the big news stories from a prophecy point of view? Does anybody want to give me any starters for 10? Brexit. Now that's a big one, isn't it? So we're certainly going to be looking at Brexit. Britain leaving Europe. Certainly we'll be looking at that. Yes, there's one big story. Anything else? Yes, Mike?
Donald Trump.
Donald Trump is another big story, isn't he? He's, in a few days' time, on the 20th of January, going to be the most powerful man in the world. So it's a big story because of who he is and what he's been saying. We're also going to have a look at Donald Trump if you want to. You might not want to, but we are later on. Anything else?
The belligerence of the coming King of the North, President Vladimir Putin.
Yeah, Vladimir Putin, absolutely, and his belligerence, as you rightly say, Barry. So basically, Russia has very much been in the news during 2012 as well. And in fact, I mean, you probably get all of the right answers if we sat here long enough. But here are some of the front page headlines that we're looking at to try and summarise, if you like, the key events. These aren't all the events. There's many more that we're going to sort of touch on. But there is the Trump triumph shocking the world. There is the Obama versus Putin situation in the middle there. There's we're out of the EU over there on the right. We've also got the ongoing situation in Syria, which still isn't sorted. We've been talking about Syria every year. I've been coming here, which I think this is probably about the 5th or 6th year, I would imagine. And Syria has been on that on the agenda from a prophecy point of view every year. And to cap it all, you know, we've also got this sort of thing going on as well, which is this ongoing terrorism, isn't it? And you know, we're shocked. Maybe we become less shocked over time. We become desanitized slightly. It's another horrendous bombing, another horrendous massacre. But it's still horrendous, isn't it? And the terrorists find new and terrible ways that are increasingly difficult for the authorities to sort out. And this particular newspaper here, this was in 1 week, 84 dead in Nice, 281 dead in Baghdad, 49 dead in Orlando, 72 dead in Lahore, 35 dead in Brussels, 18 and so it goes on. It's horrendous. And ever closer to home. I catch the tube most days in London, and frequently now there are armed police at the entrances of tube stations. There didn't used to be even a few years ago, but there certainly are now. And if I was to summarise, I think, the world in which we live, bearing in mind we've had Brexit, Trump's about to come in, bearing in mind all of this terrorism that continues to rumble away, I would sort of summarise 2016 as a year where people's fear has increased. I would say it's a year when people have become extremely perplexed and concerned about what the future is going to hold. In this country, people are concerned about what's going to happen because of Brexit, and over on the other side of the channel, people are concerned about the impact on Europe. This clearly, with Donald Trump, is a huge thing. What is he going to do? How is he going to act? Could he destabilise many things? So there's a lot of concern, and I don't know if you hear things like this at work, but I work in financial services in the city, and basically the guys there are constantly sort of coming out with the phrases, what on earth is going on? What is the world coming to? They don't like instability. People who are dealing in money certainly don't like instability, and all of this worries them. And all of that, I think, is summed up to me by these famous words, of course, by the Lord Jesus Christ, when he said, I'm going to tell you about some signs that are going to be happening in the world just before I come back. And he put it a lot more eloquent than that, but in effect that's what he was saying. He says there'll be signs in the sun, moon and stars, and upon the earth distress of nations with perplexity. Perplexity is, I don't know the answer. I'm shrugging my shoulders. I don't know what's going on. What is the answer to this? That's what perplexity is. Men's hearts failing them for fear, for looking after those things which are coming on the earth. And would you say we're now in those sorts of days where people are fearful about what might come next? I think so. And of course all of that comes just before Jesus comes back, because it says in verse 27 of Luke 21, then they shall see. So these people who are living at this time of fear and perplexity, they are going to see the Son of Man, the Lord Jesus Christ, coming in a cloud with power and great glory. So surely, if we think we're in these days, we might well be the people who see, and the world themselves will see the Lord Jesus Christ coming in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. I found a video, it lasts all of 20 seconds, that summarises everything that happened, I think, in 2016 in 20 seconds. So see what you think to this.
No one understood what's going on. People were running everywhere.
The uncertainty of Brexit, we don't know what's going to happen.
We are a more divided nation than we've ever been.
And the officer that was next to us, he ran toward the shops.
People start screaming. Everybody gets on the floor.
It's completely tragedy and misery in Syria.
Yeah, I said it was quick, that was 20 seconds, but there's Trump, there's Europe, there's concern, there's fear, there's terrorism. It's all happening in front of our very eyes. So I thought what we'd do to start with, and by the way, as Richard said earlier, there's two parts to this talk. For some reason you've decided to spread me over 2 weeks, so thank you for that. So I'm back next Wednesday Next Wednesday, God willing, we're going to be looking at Israel and the surrounding nations of Israel. Tonight, Israel is going to crop into the things that we talk about, but we're going to deal mainly with Israel next week. What we're going to do tonight is look at Russia, we're going to look at Brexit, and we're going to look at the situation with Donald Trump, and that's going to fill the time. So let me show you some headlines then in relation to Russia in 2016. I think most of you know that I do this thing called a weekly World Watch, and effectively every week I just look to see what are the big stories, I pick out 6 of them, and of course I get the headline out the newspaper, then I get the paragraph that talks about that, and then write a comment, and then put a verse that backs up why it's interesting. And of course, therefore, at the end of the year, I've got well over 300 slides, because there's 6 a week, so I've got 300 slides, and what I then do is collate them into themes. So I look through every headline, and if it talks about Russia, in it goes into the Russia pile. And then I get a pile for, Brexit, or a pile for Europe generally, and so on and so forth, a pile for Syria. And interestingly, this year there were more slides than ever before in relation to Russia, and more alarming than ever before, because what I can do is go back to previous years, because I've been doing it since 2003, so I can go right the way back. And do you know something? Back in 2003, the headlines were pathetic in comparison to the headlines we see now. Here are some of the headlines. So you'll see the headline come up, and the date when it came through. I've got some sort of music playing as I'm going to read out these headlines just to spice it up a bit. And, well, here we go. Here's Russia in 2016. So Russia warns of new world war starting in Syria. That was back in February. Russia doubling nuclear warheads. Let me turn that down again. That was in April. Russian warplanes aggressively pass US missile destroyer. That was on the 11th of April, according to the BBC. The New York Times said Russia calls new US missile defense system a direct threat. That was in May. Russia will act to neutralize US missile shield threat, says Putin. That was in May as well. Russia building new underground nuclear command posts. That was on Fox News in August the 15th. Russia calls up civilian reserves nationwide. That was on August the 30th. How Putin is restoring the fallen Soviet Empire. That was Newsweek towards the end of September. Russia suspends weapons-grade plutonium deal with the US. That was on the 2nd of October. Russia launches massive nuclear war training exercise with 40 million people. That was in the Independent on the 5th of October. Russian television warns of nuclear war amid US tensions. That was October the 14th on ABC News in America. Russia taunts US with biggest military offensive since the Cold War, and the Russian warships escorted through the English Channel. You remember that? That was the middle of October. Russia unveils Satan II missile powerful enough to wipe out UK, France or Texas. That was the end of October. Britain to send hundreds more troops to Russian border as Cold War tension escalates across Europe. That was also the end of October. Putin claims Russia's borders end nowhere at geography event. That was the 24th of November. Last up, Putin. Russia's military is stronger than any potential foe. That was the 22nd of December. Now, they're pretty amazing headlines, aren't they, when you put them all together? As I was going through them, I remember them putting them in, months ago, but when you put them all together, that's quite a powerful message, isn't it? That things are seriously wrong in the world between Russia and the West, especially with America. I'm just going to show you a news clip here from America in relation to these events because they were discussing them on a particular TV news program.
And that's right. Russia is suspect number one behind the hacks of the DNC, the email account of Hillary Clinton's campaign chairman, and now a contractor in Florida that handles voter data. President Putin was asked about this yesterday. What he said is that the hacking isn't in Russia's interest and calling it hysteria. Russia's foreign minister then went a step further, essentially saying, we don't deny it, but you haven't proven it.
Well, you know, Alex, a lot of experts are saying we haven't seen tension like this with Russia since the Cold War. So how strained is our relationship with Russia right now?
Well, Michael, in a word, they're abysmal. Without a doubt, the lowest point in relations since the Cold War, and there's now talk of a new one. Russia and the U.S. are on opposite sides of the war in Syria, where Russia is threatening to shoot down U.S. aircraft. Russia just scrapped a nuclear deal with the U.S., and then there's that meddling in the American elections. What's scary is that in Russia, we're seeing the TV networks stirring up fears of a possible nuclear war. They've just carried out a huge drill and moved missiles that can carry nuclear warheads. A very worrying situation.
Absolutely. You got that right, Alex.
Yeah, they got that right. They've got that right. So the question is, does the Bible talk about Russia being a foe, being an enemy, coming down and invading? Well, of course it does. Predominantly, we figure this out from Ezekiel chapter 38, where we read about Gog of the land of Magog, chief prince of Meshech and Tubal, and all of those places are identifiable in modern-day Russia. But there's other passages as well that talk about a northern army coming down into Israel, ultimately, because that is the destination of Russia. Whatever's going on on its border with Europe, its direction of travel ultimately is going to be south. But I just wanted to show you a couple of verses from Joel chapter 2, because I think these verses are also talking about this great invasion that is going to happen. And what we're seeing happening now with Russia is the build-up to these events. You heard me talk about the headline with them building new nuclear bunkers. 40 million people put through, put through the mill in effect, as if there was going to be a nuclear war. You don't do this type of thing if you're not expecting a huge amount of trouble. In Joel chapter 2, I've just put here verses 1 and 2 and verses 7 and 8. I'm not just plucking things out at random. It's just on the screen trying to get the main points across. This is in a slightly more modern version than the AV, but the sense is absolutely correct. Sound the trumpet in Jerusalem. Raise the alarm on my holy mountain. Let everyone tremble in fear, because the day of the Lord is upon us. Suddenly, like dawn spreading across the mountains, a great and mighty army appears. Nothing like it has been seen before or will ever be seen again. The attackers march like warriors and scale the city walls like soldiers. Straight forward they march, never breaking rank. They never jostle each other. Each moves in exactly the right position. They break through defences without missing a step. This is an army and an invasion, God says, the like of which has never been seen before. And of course we know that Russia has got around about 1 million troops. And they're all just sat there. Unlike America, that's also got 1 million plus troops, but they're spread all over the place. This is an army just sat there ready to roll. And of course, as we've already said, these are the sorts of major headlines in 2016 that we have seen. I've never, ever seen a year where World War III has been mentioned. I've gone back all the way through the slides in previous years. I've not seen World War III mentioned. Now, all of a sudden, I look in normal newspapers, daily newspapers, the Daily Mail or Daily Telegraph, and I see pictures like this, I see headlines like this. World War III fears as US activates defence shield. Are we on the brink of World War III? Furious Putin warns he will neutralise threats posed by America's £550 million missile shield stationed in Europe. Russia threatens to make Romania smoking ruins. So, you know, God says there's going to be this conflict. God says that they are going to come down in a great organised fashion. And what I believe we're seeing is Putin personally getting ready for these things. How do we know the army in Joel 2 is anything to do with this great northern confederacy that comes down, headed up by Russia? Well, again in Joel 2, later on in that chapter, it talks about the demise of this great army, because God says that I will drive away these armies from the north. So we're clearly told in Joel 2 that the armies that are coming down from the north, I will send them into parched wastelands. Those in the front will be driven into the Dead Sea. Those at the rear into the Mediterranean. The stench of their rotting bodies will rise over the land. It's a very unpleasant, situation. But again, it lines up exactly with Ezekiel 38 that says that they're going to spend how many months burying the dead? 7 months burying the dead. That's how many people are going to come down and ultimately end up being destroyed. This isn't just a few thousand Russian troops going into Syria. This is whole-scale emptying of the land of people to invade at some point. And we can see these things building up now. Again, in Joel chapter 2, there's a very interesting particular verse here, because we read that God will cause wonders in the heavens, and on the earth blood and fire and columns of smoke. The sun will become dark and the moon will turn blood red before that great and terrible day of the Lord arrives. Quite similar words, aren't they, from Luke 21 that Jesus said? That the sun would go dark and so on. There'd be signs in the sun, moon and stars. The interesting thing here, I'm sure some of you know this, that this word columns, in the authorised version it says pillars, but in the Hebrew, it's actually the Hebrew word for palm tree. These are palm trees of smoke. But of course, when they translated the Bible, it just seemed too strange to translate it as palm tree of smoke. Why would you have a palm tree of smoke? So they translated it as pillars of smoke, or in this version as columns of smoke. But in recent times, we know now why they're called pillars or palm trees of smoke, because these huge explosions that man is now able to create something that is the identical shape of a palm tree. And nuclear weapons, the most devastating of them all. And Putin, I've lost count over the last 2 years of him talking about using nuclear weapons. I've never heard a world leader, I'm 47, you know, I've watched the headlines for some time. I've never heard people just glibly talking about using nuclear weapons. And in fact, it's only recently that Putin has. But the tension has built to such a point, he seems to be quite happy to talk about it. Now, as I've said, the main passage that we believe that Russia is mentioned in detail is in Ezekiel 38. And there's that verse I quoted. Son of man, set your face against Gog of the land of Magog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal, and prophesy against him. And I'm not this evening giving you the evidence as to where Meshech and Tubal and Magog are. We've done that before, and there's talks on the internet that I've done that will show you all of that in some detail. But there is something I wanted to just highlight here. One is that all this area of Russia here is ruled over by a man called Gog, and we're told that he comes with all his army and horses and horsemen, and all of them clothed with all sorts of armour, a great company with bucklers and shields, all of them handling swords. Now, I know it doesn't say tanks and aeroplanes. They didn't exist then. This is God's description in those days of what a vast army is. That's what Joel 2 is talking about. There are other countries also with Russia. There's Ethiopia, Persia, Iran, Libya. They come from the north. When do they come? In the latter years. Where do they come against? The mountains of Israel. Okay? And by the way, in the latter years literally means in the last days. Now, there's a parallel passage to this. Anybody tell me where is the parallel passage to Ezekiel 38? Anybody know?
Zechariah 14.
Zechariah 14 has got similar themes. Where would I see all of this detail mentioned like that?
Daniel.
Daniel. Good answer, Phil. And the answer is Daniel chapter 11, because look here, right? This is exactly the same event, because look how everything lines up together. We've got at the time of the end, we've got in the latter years. We've got the king of the north, we've got coming from the north. We've got chariots and horsemen and ships, we've got this great army. We've got he's going to enter into the glorious land. We've got he's coming against the mountains of Israel. We've got the Libyans and Ethiopians. We've got the Ethiopians and the Libyans. Now, of course, there's bits of detail here that is missing from here. God often does this, doesn't he? Look at the Gospels, for instance. There'll be the same parable here and the same parable here, but sometimes slightly different information. When you slot it together, you get the complete picture. You happy with that? But here's the thing. Here's why I'm showing you this. And I only really understood this recently, and why I hadn't seen it, I do not know. But of course, over here, what we've got is the description of Russia. We've got Magog, Meshech, Tubal, and we've got this chap called Gog who is running it. Gog is the leader. He is the Russian ruler. But we're not actually told anything more about him. It just says Gog, but what we are told is where he lives. We're given a lot of information about where he comes from. In this passage over here in Daniel 11, we're not really told where he comes from, apart from it says he's from the north. But we are told a huge amount about him as an individual. Verse 36 to verse 39 of Daniel chapter 11 is talking about this fella here, Gog, who is the Russian ruler. That, in my view, is now a demonstrable fact. And I want to cover that fact with you right now, because in 2016, many things that were hidden were made clear. Watch this. Here is Daniel chapter 11, verse 36 to 39. I'm saying to you, if I just go back to this just for 1 second, notice the king is here, and he's doing lots of things we're going to look at. And notice what happens. At the time of the end, the king of the south, whoever that is, pushes at this king. This king isn't a nation. This king is a man. He's a human being. And when does he live? The time of the end. Not 200 years ago. 200 years ago wasn't the time of the end. Not 100 years ago. 100 years ago was not the time of the end. This is at the time of the end. Therefore, a human being who is the ruler of Russia must exist at the time of the end, and somebody pushes, provokes, goads him. So let's go back to here. Here's Daniel 11, verses 36 to 39. I'm going to read this out, and then I'll show you how it fits. This particular ruler that exists at the time of the end, which I'm saying is Gog, the king will do as he pleases, exalting himself and claiming to be greater than every god, even blaspheming the God of gods. He will succeed, so whatever he does, he's going to be successful, but only until the time of wrath is completed. For what has been determined will surely take place. He will have no respect for the God of his ancestors, or for the God loved by women, or for any other god, for he will boast that he is greater than them all. Instead of these, he will worship the God of armed forces, and the God his ancestors never knew, he will worship with gold, silver, precious stones, and expensive gifts. He will work in the strongest fortress. He will honour those who submit to him, appointing them to positions of authority and dividing the land among them as their reward. Then at the time of the end, the king of the south will provoke him, the AV says push him. Then the king of the north will storm out with chariots and a vast navy. This is Gog, this is the Russian ruler, and the man who fits this word for word right the way through is Vladimir Putin. So here's all the key phrases, one after the other, and lined up against this man. We're told that he will magnify himself and exalt himself. It's very similar language actually to Daniel chapter 8, talking about the latter-day Antiochus Epiphanes. But here he is, a man who exalts himself. He's even got his own youth training camp called the Narshes, believe it or not, where they worship and are trained to worship Vladimir Putin himself. And that is pictures of him on their T-shirts. It's the most abhorrent camp. I'm not even going to tell you any more about that here and now. Mikhail Gorbachev, of course, one of the previous Russian leaders, says that Vladimir Putin views himself as second only to God. This is indeed a man that exalts himself. He worships the God of armed forces. We're told Putin, you don't need me to tell you that Putin worships the armed forces. He's always involved with those armed forces and has done more than any other Russian ruler ever in terms of bolstering up those forces and developing Satan II missiles powerful enough to wipe out the entire United Kingdom with one bomb. That's the sort of chap that is ruling Russia at the moment. Now, this is a 2016 announcement. So we were told there that this man worships gold, silver, and it actually said expensive gifts in the version that I was looking at. And on the 25th of January 2016, Panorama, well-respected British investigative documentary programme, comes out with this. Did you all watch this? It was definitely worth seeing. It was called Putin's Secret Riches. Vladimir Putin has been accused of corruption on a breathtaking scale. His critics say he has used his power to amass a secret fortune. So is the Russian president really one of the richest people in the world? And the Panorama programme on the BBC, a 45-minute programme, went through all the evidence that they collated to say that this man has taken over so many businesses and companies and pocketed the cash himself. He could even be richer than Bill Gates. He could possibly be the richest man on the planet. Certainly, he is worshipping gold, silver, and expensive gifts. Do you remember it said that he worked in a fortress? That's what it said in verse 39. This man works in a fortress. It just so happens that the word Kremlin means fortress. God is telling us, I'll even tell you where he works, if you like. And is there any other person that works in something called a fortress? Answer, no. The last bit of the passage says that he rewards those who follow him. And in 2016, this was finally revealed on another BBC Panorama programme that explained what Putin has done with his vast wealth that he has created. Look at what it said in Daniel 11, verse 39. He will honour those who submit to him, appointing them to positions of authority and dividing the land among them as a reward. Now watch 2 or 3 minutes of Panorama.
He's the world leader accused of personally approving murder on the streets of London.
The conclusion that the Russian state was probably involved in the murder of Mr. Litvinenko is deeply disturbing.
But is the president implicated in an assassination also responsible for theft on an extraordinary scale?
He has fleets of things that almost no billionaire in the West would have.
Vladimir Putin has been accused of looting his own country.
Today, Putin behaves like a czar.
Tonight, we investigate the truth about President Putin's riches.
Why would it be kept secret?
Because it belongs personally to Putin, not to the state.
And for the first time, the Americans say what they really think about the Russian president.
Is Vladimir Putin corrupt?
In our view, yes.
The men closest to Putin have been with him for years. They were with him here in St. Petersburg, and they've stayed with him ever since. And this is the group that he trusts and that he rewards. And this is the group that runs Russia.
Putin's lawyer at the town hall became president and then prime minister of Russia. His former deputy also served as Prime Minister. The chief of staff at the town hall now runs Russia's anti-drugs agency. His former assistant now runs the biggest oil company in the world. And his former economist now runs the biggest gas company in the world. For those who've been in Putin's circle, the benefits have been immense. A cellist who is godfather to Putin's daughter has a valuable stake in a major Russian bank. A neighbour has an even bigger stake. Another neighbour ended up running the railways. A childhood friend has made a fortune from government contracts. And his brother has made even more. The Americans say this is how Putin's Russia works.
And God knew at the very beginning that a man would exist at the time of the end who would be exactly like that. There is no other person that can fit Daniel 11 verses 36 to 39. And that is him. And in 2016, how amazing that the BBC has put documentary programmes on with exactly the same language of those verses, that he has rewarded those people who have followed him and divided the land among them, which is exactly what he has done. And of course, what we get is this man that exists at the time of the end, and the king of the south is going to provoke him, push him, goad him. The king of the south, anybody want to tell me to keep you awake? Who is the king of the south? What nation is the king of the south, or nations? America, Britain, the young lions, they're the ones. And so there's a when it talks about the king of the south provoking an individual person, this is a group of nations or nation that is pushing and provoking at this individual person. When this individual person has been provoked and pushed, they then turn into the king of the north. When it says the king of the north, this is now a nation. This is no longer an individual person. The king of the north is now the nation that comes down. So this is an individual man and what he's doing. There's a provocation of him by the nation of America, Britain and so on. And then this transforms into the army of a nation of the king of the north. And the king of the north nation is Russia, that comes out with this vast navy. Now here is another amazing thing. Because you remember I showed you all these headlines, front page newspapers. Did you notice this? To Russia with shove. Now why are they saying that? Why are they saying that America is shoving? They're pushing him. They're pushing him. You see, in the dying days of Vladimir Putin, in the dying days of Obama's office, he is doing everything he can, and we'll cover this more next week with Israel, to scupper Trump's overtures, because Trump is saying, I really like this guy, I'm best friends with him, we're on TV together once, we're all good pals. And so what Obama is doing on the back of the US elections is causing as much trouble as he possibly can. And of course, only a few days ago, 36 diplomats were expelled, weren't they, from America. And I'm absolutely convinced between now and the date that Obama leaves office, he will do something more to Putin personally. I actually think he will. In fact, Obama has said so. Obama has said that I'm going to take more action against this man here because he sees him as the problem as to why Trump is getting in the first place. Because of the hacking, and the hacking of and all the rest of it, he believes goes straight back to Vladimir Putin. But whether this is the push or not, I know, because God has said that there will be a goading and a provocation from the king of the south to that man, that king. And then, of course, it says that the king of the north comes down, the Russian army comes down with many ships. And in fact, we've just seen some of the ships come down, haven't we? Right past our coast. Right past over. His aircraft carrier, and other ships. He's got many, many more ships, by the way. He only sent 10. There's already 10 in the Middle East. He's got about another 60 that he could send down. They will one day come down. On top of all of that, if that wasn't enough, the whole situation with Europe against Russia is on the brink of conflict as well. Here's a few other headlines in relation to that. So this is from May. Putin says Romania and Poland may now be in Russia's crosshairs. That was on May the 27th. Poland to recruit 35,000 strong paramilitary force to combat the threat from Russia. That was in June. Ukraine puts troops on combat alert as tensions with Russia spiral. That was in August. Lithuania very afraid of Russian Baltic threat during Washington power vacuum. That was in November. Russia deploys new missiles to the Baltic Sea region. That was also in November, on November the 21st. Russians are coming. This is the Sun, so you normally take this with a pinch of salt, but there we are. Russians are coming. Invasion fears as land-grabbing Putin masses 55,000 troops on the border with Ukraine. That was the end of November. Swedish towns told to make preparations regarding the threat of war and conflict with Russia. That was in December, just a few days ago, in the Daily Telegraph. And so, if you put all of those nations that I've just mentioned on a map, this is what it looks like. So here's Europe. There's the big beast of Russia. Sweden was mentioned. Lithuania was mentioned. Poland was mentioned. Ukraine was mentioned. And Romania was mentioned, all gearing up for conflict. Now, here's how I see it. This here is a fault line, and it is a fault line that Daniel chapter 2 tells us all about. Because the fault line, do you remember Nebuchadnezzar? Nebuchadnezzar had a vision about a great image, and this image was... We've got Babylon here. They're all symbolic of the empires. This is a timeline. The timeline comes all the way down. It starts off with Babylon, then there was the Medes and the Persians, then there was the Greek Empire, and these legs were the Roman Empire, the iron legs of Rome, and finally there's the feet of iron and clay. And Christadelphians for many, many years have said that the two legs are symbolic of how Rome, the Empire of Rome, actually divided into two. And you know something? It did divide into two. It divided into a Western Roman Empire, which became what we now know as modern-day Europe, and it divided into Eastern Roman Empire that was once based in Turkey, in Constantinople, but eventually moved from there into Russia and the Moscow area. So these two areas are what we still call East versus West. So when we say, the West is against Russia, or Russia's against the West, this is the West. And Russia is in the East. This fault line, you see all these nations here, this is the fault line between East and West. Now, do you know something? There are some who are expecting the East and the West to somehow all join up together and become a great big enormous confederacy together, and so are slightly bemused that we've got this fractured fault line running along here. But we shouldn't be amazed at that, and I'll tell you why. In Revelation chapter 16 we're told about this division still existing at the time of the end, because the beast is mentioned in Revelation chapter 16, and the beast is none other than God's depiction in graphical form of the Western Roman Empire. And in Daniel chapter 16, it says there's frog-like spirits, and these are wicked teachings. And these wicked teachings come out, it says, from the beast and the dragon and something called the false prophet, which I haven't put on the map here, but that's to do with the Vatican down here. But ultimately, what we've got here is a beast, and the dragon that is spoken of in Revelation is to do with this Eastern Roman Empire. So in other words, brethren and sisters and friends, there must still exist at the time of the end two identifiable, you could say three, but certainly two identifiable forces that are still separate. There isn't just one great big beast at the time of the end. There is this beast and there is a dragon. Therefore, we can argue surely that actually there isn't a coming together, that the fault line still exists right the way through. When you look at these, in Daniel chapter 2, it talks about the toes of the feet were part of iron and part of clay, and we know that these 10 toes here refer to the 10 horns that are on this head of this beast here, and are all to do with Europe over here on the western side of things. And we'll look at more of that in just a minute. But that's why I think we've got this division, and I think the division will remain. When Russia comes down into Israel, Europe will not be with Russia. Magog is nothing to do with what we now call Europe, nor is Gomer. They're all areas down here around the area of Turkey and so on. Russia, when it comes down with Iran, is going to come down on its own with Iran and with Northern Africa. Europe is a separate war, and the Europe war, headed up with the Pope, is a war against Christ and the saints when Christ is established. Do you know how I know that? Because it says in Revelation chapter 17 that the beast and the woman that's riding it will make war against Christ and the saints. That isn't who Russia's making a war against. Russia's making a war for spoil out of Israel. It's a totally different war. So, how are we doing? Not very well. Let's speed up. So, here's the next thing. That was all about Russia, but I had to get that off my chest because there's so much going on with that. What about this? We're out of the EU. This is a great big headline, but one that as Christadelphians, as I'll show you in a minute, we've been talking about for a long, long, long time. Here's some of the headlines. George Soros, the billionaire who broke the Bank of England, opts for Goldhaven, saying Brexit would spell the end of the EU. This is quite amazing. Do you remember this? Massive thunderstorms from Europe smash into UK and could decide EU referendum vote. That was on the 23rd of June. Thunderstorms and flash floods caused chaos across Britain in the final hours of the EU referendum as commuters were left stranded in London. And they do think that these enormous storms that came crashing in from Europe, and these were very unusual storms. You know, most of the storms we get come in off the Atlantic, don't they, coming over from America. Rarely will a storm head the other way over from Europe into Britain. It's extremely unusual, highly rare, especially of this intensity, and lo and behold, it comes at the exact day of the referendum, and many people who would have voted were unable to vote because of those storms. And so the following day, of course, we get vote leave today, but we're out, and so on. These were great big news stories, not just in this country, but around the world. I'll just skip this video because it's basically saying what I've just said. Let's just have a think about this, though. As Christadelphians, for a long time, as I've said, we have believed that Britain would one day exit Europe. John Thomas, who was the founder, if you like, of the Christadelphians back in the mid-1800s, wrote a book called Elpis Israel. That book literally means the hope of Israel. And in that he said Britain cannot be included among them, referring to what we now would call Europe. And he wrote that in 1848. Britain cannot be part of them. In Milestones, in a publication by Brother Pierce in 1981, he wrote, Britain will separate from Europe. In a book called The Guardians of Israel and Arabia, it said Britain's eventual exit from Europe is a certainty. That was written in 1990. So we've been saying for a long time that Britain will not be part of Europe. And the reason we've said that is because the king of the south power in Ezekiel 38 is mentioned as Tarshish and the young lions. And Tarshish is Britain, and therefore Tarshish would not be part of this great invasion that is coming down. What I wanted to just focus on very quickly is what could be the impact of Brexit down the line. And here's what I think might happen, and I'm just picking the headlines here, that sort of say what I think is going to happen next. German Chancellor, looking a little bit fed up there, is basically saying the end of the EU fears in Germany that Brexit could lead to the breakup of the European Union. Now, I'll show you why I think that is interesting in a minute, but there's been many headlines that say Britain's exit of Europe could, like a domino effect, knock many other countries over. And the end of the EU, Brussels fears devastating domino effect of Brexit, the collapse of EU, and its impact on America. So why do we think, or why do I think, that potentially Brexit could cause Europe to fragment and break up? And what about the great beast of Revelation 17? How does all this come together? Let me just show you quickly here. We're back here to these 10 toes of Daniel's image in Nebuchadnezzar's image in Daniel chapter 2. And you know these words really well, but just have a listen to them again. The feet and toes you saw were a combination of iron and baked clay, showing that this final kingdom, because that's what we're talking about here, this kingdom will be divided. Like iron mixed with clay, it will have some of the strength of iron, but while some parts of it will be as strong as iron, other parts will be as weak as clay. This mixture of iron and clay also shows that these kingdoms will try to strengthen themselves by forming alliances with each other through intermarriage, but they will not hold together, just as iron and clay do not mix. So there's this kingdom at the end. It's sort of a real shaky sort of thing that's made of iron and clay. They're trying to form alliances through intermarriage, this version says, but they're not holding together. The whole thing, like iron and clay, aren't mixing. And during the reigns of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom, the kingdom that will never be destroyed or conquered. It will crush all these kingdoms into nothingness, and it will stand forever. So what does all of that mean? Well, here's what I think. The feet are to do with Western Europe as we now know it. Okay, the Iron of Rome continued in that leg down here, and basically it's a continuation of the Roman Empire. So the feet themselves are to do with Europe itself. Iron is symbolised in Revelation as the strength of rulership. So iron is always to do with, when you look at it throughout the scriptures, iron is to do with the strength of rulership. We want to rule the people. We want to control the people. That's what Europe is trying to do. The clay is symbolic of the power of the people, because pretty much all the way through the scriptures, clay is symbolic of people. It says that Adam was made of the dust of the ground. In Isaiah, it says that we are like clay in your hands, and you are the potter. So the clay is symbolic of the power of the people that isn't mixing with this strength of rulership. So Europe's trying to rule everything and control our lives, but the people are stopping that happening. Interestingly, what the iron is trying to do, what this whole project is trying to do, is mingle the races together. This is a Babel project, basically. We're trying to mix the races together. How are they doing that? How are they mixing the races together? They're doing it by removing borders. I'll show you in just a second how they do that. But it doesn't hold together. The whole thing falls apart. God says that it's a divided kingdom and it will not hold together. And the little stone eventually comes, and that, of course, is the Lord Jesus Christ coming back. But this is what Europe has done. It's done something called the Schengen Agreement. I don't know whether you've heard of the Schengen Agreement, but this is the thing that winds a lot of people up. The Schengen area is the area including 26 European countries that have abolished passport and any other type of border control at their mutual borders. It mostly functions as a single country for international travel purposes with a common visa policy, which is why we're not actually in the Schengen Agreement, but if you lived in this area here, people can just move around at will, and therefore they mix the races up. And of course, in Europe, they all speak different languages, but the project of Europe is to try and mix the whole lot together. But people have pushed back. Britain on the outside has pushed back and said, we don't like this, we don't want all of this immigration. we just don't want it and voted against it. And the fear is now in Europe that in fact this will be a domino effect across here into these countries, and so we might well see the disintegration of the EU as we know it. Abandoned ship, there's Britain sailing off, here's Europe about to go off into the abyss. There's Time magazine, the fall of Europe, again a domino effect. I think we might well see Europe divide and break apart from what we see right now, which is a humongous conglomeration of 26 nations. However, something comes out of the abyss when it goes off the cliff, and what comes out of the abyss is mentioned in Revelation chapter 17. Because out of the ruins of the EU that we now see will come what the Bible says is a seven-headed, one might say eight-headed beast with 10 horns. And in Revelation 17, the beast, which is the revived Holy Roman Empire, is going to ascend out of the bottomless pit, and 10 kings who have not yet risen to power, they'll be appointed to their kingdoms for one brief moment to reign with the beast. They will all agree to give him their power and authority, and together they will go to war against the Lamb, Jesus, but the Lamb will defeat them because he is Lord of lords and King of all kings. And his called and chosen and faithful ones will be with him. And so, what comes out of the ashes of the EU when it shakes apart because of Brexit will rise out the Holy Roman Empire beast system of 10 nations. And you know something? When you look at the ancient Holy Roman Empire, it covers exactly 10 modern-day EU nations. So instead of it being 26, I think there'll be a 10 nations, 10 kings that will say, actually, let's do this thing properly. We're going to be one united, conglomerate of nations, more so than ever we were. We can't be 26 anymore. We're falling apart at the seams. We're going to come out of this bottomless pit and create a brand new country, a brand new empire, probably ruled over by Germany there, and that's still to come. So, finally, in the last 2 minutes, I've gone on, but this is just a few minutes on Mr. Trump, because we'll talk more about Trump next week. But this is pretty shocking stuff, isn't it, really, when you stop and think about it? This guy's tweeting like mad and coming out with all sorts of nonsense that is seriously upsetting lots of people. He's never been in government. He's the only American president in history to have never had anything whatsoever to do with politics, and yet he's been voted in. Nobody knows what he's going to do. Nobody really knows what he thinks. He says what he thinks, and that's half the problem. He'll just shoot from the hip. But shooting from the hip in a diplomacy world where people have got large weapons and armies isn't a great idea. But what we must remember is this, that in Romans chapter 13, verse 1, it says, everyone must submit to governing authorities, for all authority comes from God, and those in positions of authority have been placed there by God. So for some reason, God has put Trump in at this particular point in time, at the very point when everything is destabilising. That isn't a coincidence, is it? That verse is saying to me that every world leader that we see on the stage at the minute has been put there by God for some reason, including this man. The press have just not known what to... they look at this. What have they done? God save America. This is it's a disaster, potentially a complete and horrifying disaster. Time magazine dropped through my door. I've been having Time magazine for some time, and that dropped through my door. I thought, what do they know? That, this is, the end is near. I'll skip this little video. He's saying the same sorts of things. Here's some of the things that he said. Iran nuclear deal could collapse under Trump. Trump win puts US-Russia hostility on hold, but for how long? These two, Putin versus Trump, they're both mavericks, they're both big egos, they've both got nuclear armies, they're both, effectively could end up, even though they're saying they're best friends, could easily end up on the wrong side of each other. And to be fair, we know they will, because God says that they will. Russia unconvinced Donald Trump is convenient US president for Moscow. That was in Newsweek back in November. So straight away they're saying, we're not entirely certain ourselves. We didn't like Hillary Clinton, but we're not entirely certain about this fella either. Donald Trump, US must greatly expand nuclear capabilities. This was on December the 22nd or 21st. And he tweeted that seconds after Putin had gone on one of his shows saying that we're going to expand our nuclear forces. He tweeted, well, we're going to do the same. And everybody's going, what? We've been scaling back for years. You just tweeted we're going to expand our nuclear army, weapons. What we do know is, from Ezekiel 38, that this man here is going to think an evil thought, because in verse 10 it says, you, Putin, Gog, will think an evil thought, and you will say, I will go to the land of unwalled villages to take a spoil and to take a prey. That thought might already have gone through this man's head, but if it hasn't, it's going to happen. But on the other side of it, in Ezekiel 38, as we've mentioned, there is an opposing force, which is Sheba, Dedan, couldn't fit that in, Tarshish, and the young lions. And this is talking about America and Britain. Britain is the old lion, America and Australia and so on are these young lions here. And they're all based in Sheba and Dedan, which is this area of Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Qatar. And look at all the bases that we have got in this exact area. So we know that the king of the South power is down here in Saudi Arabia, and Russia is going to come down from the north. And when Putin thinks his thought, I'm going to come and invade, down here they also start saying something, and here's what they say. Have you come to take a spoil? This man could well be in power at the time that all this happens, and those very words might come out of a tweet from this man. What are you doing? What's happening? Have you come to take a spoil? You can just see it happening. And it will happen. I'm just going to finish with a 1.5 minute video of a professor in America. And this professor is a Russian expert. And to me he summarises everything we've looked at pretty much tonight, especially to do with Russia and with Trump. And have a listen to how he puts it across, because he puts it across better than I can, I think.
This move announced by the State Department comes just one day after the current Secretary of State John Kerry doubled down on those attacks against Israel we mentioned, which will make achieving Mideast peace even harder for President-elect Donald Trump. And our next guest, a leading expert on Russia, says these new sanctions are not really aimed at Russia. This move, too, is actually meant to muddy the water some more for Mr. Trump. Stephen Cohn is professor of Russian studies at both NYU and Princeton University. Welcome, Professor. You say this is the president trying to cripple Mr. Trump a bit?
Well, it's one of the things I said. I'm not sure. I mean, look, we got a really strange situation, and I would say exceedingly dangerous.
Why?
Well, our relationship with Russia is worse than it's been since the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. And we're taking steps that are going to escalate it, make it worse. On the other hand, they haven't given us any facts about what the Russians actually did. So between this, I would say, semi-hysterical reaction by the American political class and the absence of facts, we don't ask, what's the impact of this going to be on Russia itself?
So
what kind of decisions is it going to produce in Moscow?
So your bottom line point tonight is, you've got 30 seconds.
In 30 seconds, we are in an exceedingly dangerous relationship with Russia. There are 3 places fraught with actual war: Ukraine, Syria, and, of course, the Baltic region, where NATO is building up. Escalating now, with everybody talking about nuclear weapons, as Trump did last week. In my lifetime, I don't recall anything as dangerous as we now are going through, with a layer of hysteria in the media. Everybody demanding that Obama do more.
Welcome to office, Mr. Trump. We appreciate it. Professor Cohn, thanks for that.
Interesting, isn't it? It's not only us saying it, it's there. Jesus said, we will live in a time of distress and perplexity, men's hearts failing them for fear, for looking after those things which are coming on the earth. That's what that professor just said. So next week, because that's the end you'll be glad to know of this week, we're going to have a good look at Israel. and we're going to see what's been happening, especially in the last sort of 2 weeks in relation to Israel. And also we're going to have a look at the surrounding nations with Turkey and Syria and Iran, and see how all this that's been going on with Russia and so on has been impacting that area. And finally, what I'm going to do next week, all being well we'll have time, is show you why 2017 could be the year that God's judgments actually do begin. But if you're here next week, you'll hear all about that.